Jesus, you're my firm foundation. Oh, we are a little low tonight. Most of us are old in here tonight, right? All right. Yeah. I kind of hate to even get started in a thing. So why don't we just have a closing prayer and go home? That way I won't have to split things up. Okay, what do we got? All right. There we go. Good to see everybody. It might be kind of convenient for us tonight in the sense of there was just a couple points I wanted to make from that I wanted us to look at from the lesson last week, and then get into lesson 4. And I'm kind of hoping you all drag this end of lesson 3 out so I can start lesson 4 next week. But when I want it to happen, it probably won't happen. Now let's see where we've been here, what we've been doing here. Better turn it on. Okay. All right. We've discussed how God intended a male and female relationship, and I know you all know that. Nothing new to you. But again, I want to emphasize and underline, especially in today's culture and society, and you may get tired of hearing it, but God intended for a man and a female to have this relationship or this bond together, all right? And we discussed that from the very beginning. We noticed the effects that the first sin had on marriage relationships. In other words, Adam is given this woman in the garden, and things are going well until there's what? Sin. And there's some penalties for the sin in their life. They were kicked out of the garden, correct? Out of that great relationship. And I would imagine Adam and Eve experienced a little different relationship between themselves because God has laid down some specific laws and rules there. And it wasn't quite as pleasant as in the garden. In the garden, everything was there. All he had to do was take care of what was in the garden. Now when he farms, he's going to be bothered with weeds and all that stuff. And she's going to have her responsibilities also. And then they have children. And Cain kills Abel, and their family life just isn't going very well, right? And so sin has had some effect there on them. And last week we discussed the impact of sin on the marriage relationship, but we didn't finish it. Now again, I want to say when these lessons were designed, I thought I had them set out so we could get through one lesson a week, but it hasn't worked so far. But we're going to try to catch up on that here pretty soon. We noticed last week, we start out, I'm not going to say much about it, but I just want to get down to the point where we left off. We discussed 1 John 1:9 and the idea that for the believer to have a growing relationship with God, he or she must deal aggressively with sin. And what we're trying to point out there, that is in a marriage relationship, as a couple, you both have to deal aggressively with sin. And if you have sin between one another, what do you need to do? You need to solve it. You need to repent, confess, and ask forgiveness. God will forgive you. Sometimes it's hard for husband and wives to forgive one another or forget. Let's put it that way. You might forgive, but there's this hanging on, this never forgetting, and we want to put things aside so that we don't bring up the past into the future. Very, very important for us to think about. We looked at confession. We looked at the consequence of sin. We talked a little bit about repentance, that's what we ended on. And what I wanted us to get into is the idea that, and you probably don't have lesson 3 with you, most of you, but God has always had specific commandments that pertain to the marriage relationship. God does understand the powerful consequences of a wrong physical relationship. We're talking physical relationship now, so we're talking about what? Sex. Okay? And he's going to deal very directly with it. 2 main things we want to talk about that sometimes men and women today have a hard time with, and sometimes, when I first took Christ on in my life, it was under some of those older preachers, and boy, they really preached really, really hard on sin. Remember those days? I mean, they preached on sin all the time. And they used to preach on what we're going to talk about all the time. And I don't think it hurt. But go to Exodus 20. And let's look at verse, it's a very short verse. Gene, would you turn over to 1 Corinthians 7? Be ready to read that for us. Exodus 20, verse 14 says, you shall not commit adultery. Now, what we're trying to do in this study together is just see what the Bible has to say about a relationship with a man and a woman. Now, some of you might say, well, we need to study the Song of Solomon. I would love to study that and prepare for that, but what we're just seeing right now is about the relationship that God set up, okay? And in that relationship, you're to be committed to one another, and he doesn't talk a whole lot about the things that some of us guys don't like to talk about, the real gushy-gushy stuff, okay? He talks about commitment to one another, being a contract. And here he says not to commit adultery. We're talking about the marriage relationship. What is adultery? Okay, thank you. You weren't afraid to say it. Relationship outside the marriage. Okay? In other words, you would be with another man outside while you were still married, and that's adultery. That is what? A sin. Now let me ask you this. I've had some say, well, what if one of your mates go and have a homosexual relationship outside the marriage? Is that still adultery? It's still what? Adultery. And God forbids adultery. And there's several things that you might think about what adultery does against a spouse. In adultery, you're wrongly united, correct? You have unity here with your spouse, and you go with someone else. That's a wrong type of unity. You're committed physically and spiritually and psychologically to someone outside the marriage. It's not just a physical thing. Again, it's a psychological thing. And for believers, it's a spiritual thing. It's sin. And this whole thing of adultery defeats God's plan for his glory. Our marriages are to glorify God. They're not as much about us as they are about God. And as we'll look in just a week or two down the road, we'll look at the idea that marriage is that one thing that we as Christians show the world what Christ's relationship is with the church. It should at least help us understand more Christ's relationship with the church. Because he'll never commit adultery against us, right? He'll never walk away from us. He'll never be untrue to us. And that is how it's supposed to be in our marriage relationships. Now, I know there's a lot of difficulties in marriage. I'm not trying to lay that aside at all. There are problems in marriages. But if we follow God's pattern of things, we might solve a lot of those problems. Now, is there anybody in here that is beyond committing adultery? No, there's not. If you think you are, you're in dangerous ground. And I don't mean that to be smart or anything. If you don't protect yourself, that's why you'll hear me talking about the idea when Christians need help. If it's a single person, if it's a woman, they need to go to a woman. If it's a man, he needs to go to a man. If it's a couple, yes, they can go to just the man alone. But you can't put yourself in situations. You have to protect yourself. You have to protect yourself from adultery. And a lot of leaders in the body of Christ do not protect themselves from adultery. And there's such a thing as transference. We're not going to get into all those things, but you need to protect yourself. And if you as a sister or a brother have problems with that, you need to certainly share it with your spouse. I mean, I'm not, if you've committed adultery, you need to ask forgiveness. And even if you thought about it, Jesus says, if you thought about adultery, you've what? You've what? You've already committed it. So if you're having a struggle with this, you need to love one another enough that you can talk with each other, and you at least need to get somebody you can be held accountable to. Because none of us are above that problem. There's another thing. Gene, would you read 1 Corinthians? I don't have this in your notes. 1 Corinthians 7, verses 2 and 9. No, 2 and 9.
Verse 2, but because of sexual immorality, each man is to have his own wife, and each woman is to have her own husband. Verse 9, but if they do not have self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion.
Okay, so we call fornication what? What's fornication? Sex before marriage, okay, that's basically. Do we have a lot of that going on in the church? Yes, we do. Always have had. It's always been in the world, hasn't it? Doesn't excuse it any. But it is also a sin before God, because he tells us that we are not to commit fornication. And matter of fact, Paul says we're better to marry than to burn where? In hell, depending on your translation. You're better to marry and commit yourself to someone than to end up where? Separated from God, or end up in hell. So we really need to think about that. So most of us in here, I think most of us, there's bound to be some single one or two here, whatever, but most of us, if we committed sex with someone else other than our sexual partner, we are committing what? Adultery, and that is a sin. If we're not united with another sexual partner or in marriage, it's fornication. It's immorality, period, on both of them, isn't it? So, do older people need to protect themselves, since most of us in here are older?
Yeah.
Why? Oh, absolutely. Right. Or even if your spouse doesn't die. You know, some people laugh when I say that older people still have sexual lives about them. You know, they say, oh, can't be. Yeah, but they really do. Older people really do. You know, and so you need to be careful about those things. And remember, if you're thinking it, it's just as bad as doing it. Any comments on that so far? Who said yeah? Ken.
I was just thinking the thought process is the most important. There are so many people that you think that it's okay to think about certain things as long as they don't participate or do it. And but your passion, as you know, Paul talks about, you talk about your passion begins to grow and you begin to visualize certain situations.
Okay, don't go too far now.
You know what
Yes.
you end up going there.
Yeah.
But if you don't think about it, and if you're like Joseph and you can flee from that circumstance and avoid situations.
If we,
Sometimes it's even accidental. Somebody might come to you for counseling.
oh, it can happen. Yeah. Yeah. It can happen. That's why leaders are in such precarious circumstance, and leaders need to be careful. Never meet with the opposite sex behind closed doors for counseling. I remember I told the dad down in Fredericksburg, I said, I want a window in my door. Even if I'm in there with my wife, people can see that she's in there with me if we're talking to somebody else. So just protect yourselves. I don't think I'm being unusual by asking that, because it's very, very important. Go back to Exodus 20 with me real quick. Cliff, would you turn to Matthew 5:28 for me, please? And Matt, would you do me a favor and be ready to read Judges 7:19 to 21? On down the road a little bit, just be ready, okay? All right, in Matthew 20 and verse 17, it says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your, I was just trying to keep you from going there, okay? You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. You ever covet anything? What is coveting? Okay, more than wishing, isn't it? Who said desire it? Cliff said desire it. You desire it. And you all probably never had that problem. Sure you have. And matter of fact, perhaps you've allowed to overcome you. We're going to talk about her here for just a little bit. So in a marriage relationship, you've got to be careful Even with the marriage of your neighbor. Right? Did you ever see neighbors end up in sexual relationships? I have. Maybe you haven't. But you're not to covet the things of your neighbor. So should I covet my neighbor's wife? Okay, good example. We're just going to go ahead and go. I asked you Matthew 5:28. Would you read that?
But I say unto you that everyone that looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart.
Okay, so we've already talked about it, haven't we? If we look on a woman and we want her, we've already done it. And if we don't do something about that, we're going to what? We're going to do it. Well, you know how I mean that. And so just think about it. So I'm going to try to skip through here a little bit. Before Matt reads the passage he has for us. Now, first of all, to covet then would be to sin, right? And it talks about that in James that you had here, that we studied here quite a while ago, James chapter 1. Let's turn over there together and read verses 13 to 15. Yeah. James 1, 13 to 15. And then Matt's going to read to us from Judges 7. Whoops. Right there it is. 13 to 15. Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in a gentleness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousies and selfish ambitions in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is, I'm sorry, I want chapter 1. I don't know what I'm thinking. I'm reading that, it's not right. It's 13 through 15, chapter 1. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lusts. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Now, we all talked about that, but this isn't the first time that God's descriptive about what coveting is. Now, I know it doesn't mention coveting there, but it does mention lust, that's what it's talking about. Would you read now the example in Judges, Matt, and tell us what that's about? Judges, 7, 19 to 21. Achan.
Well, it's not, that's why I was reading, this is Gideon and the 100 men.
Judges 7?
Check 8 and 9 around it to see if they can.
What did I do wrong here? I thought for sure. April. Yes, Achan would have been, what did I do wrong there? Oh, now, come on. It's in the first, they went to Jericho. They were to touch nothing in Jericho. And Achan did what? He stole, didn't he? Israel is circumcised, the conquest of Jericho. I know, I thought it was chapter 7. Maybe it's 6. I just wrote that down. What did I do wrong?
Is it sin at Jericho?
Yeah, it would be sin.
It's what's J-O-S?
Joshua what? 7. 19 to 21. The sin of Achan, yes. Joshua, I told you Judges, and I'm sorry, brother. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. This is Joshua 7,
Mm-hmm.
17 through 19.
Yes.
He brought the clan of Judah, and he took the family of the Zarites, and brought the family of the Zarites, man by man, Zacchaeus. And he brought his household, man by man. And Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zacchaeus, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, was taken. Joshua said to Achan, my son, I beg thee, give glory to the Lord God of Israel, and make confession to him. And tell me not what you've done, not fight it for me.
Go ahead. Go on. Keep.
Achan answered Joshua and said, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and this is what I've done. When I saw among the spoils the beautiful Babylonian garment, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels. I coveted them and took them. And there they are, hidden in the earth in the midst of my tent, with the silver and
So he saw them, he wanted them, and he did what? Now, Matt, here's the thing. Were there consequences to that? Great consequences.
more than just himself,
Okay, so what? You remember the consequence? I'm sure you do.
his family, and his family.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, Israel lost a battle because of that, didn't they? But his whole family, the whole family, yes, was wiped out. Yes. Everybody. So James says, you know, lust is conceived, right? When you really do the same thing, when you see it, you, instead of turning your eyes away, you dwell on it and you think about it. And if you think about it long enough, you'll do it. Is that basically what it's saying? Is it? I mean, okay, so is coveting a serious sin? We don't talk a lot about coveting, right? Because it's kind of one of those hidden things. But it's not hidden from who? From God. And also in coveting, there's serious consequences. If you go into a marriage relationship, well, about all of your marriage relationships, and you have young people or in your marriage relationship, you go into that marriage relationship thinking, well, if things just don't work out, you know, I'll find somebody else. You're already what? You're already losing. And if you go into a marriage relationship thinking this person's going to be my perfect everything, you've already what? Because they're not. In my day, when you got married, you finally learned when your wife woke up, she had big curlers in her hair and she didn't look quite like she looked when you dated her. You know what I mean? Marriage brings out a whole new type of life, doesn't it? So you had your hand up, Gene.
Well, I was just thinking physical lust. It can be material.
Yes.
I mean, for young couples, you know, oh, got a job, better get a really nice car, maybe a really nice house.
Something you can't afford.
Next thing along comes debt, and that can ruin a marriage.
Yeah, yeah. So the key thing is here, and that's a good thing to bring up, is we want to look at what God says about marriage. And he doesn't say a whole lot about it, does he? When you think of all the books that are written about marriage and all the ideas that we have and the things we bring in, so forth. But coveting's a big deal. What are some things you can covet that could be dangerous, that would be a sin? Well, coveting's a sin. But what are the kind of things you can covet besides adultery or fornication or sexual immorality? I didn't hear you.
Money, finances.
Money, finance, what else?
Popularity.
Wow. Well, yeah. You suppose that happens?
When I was in high school.
It did when I was a grown-up too, okay? So popularity can be important for some. What's some of the other things that you can covet? Prestige? Huh? Power? Does coveting lead to jealousy? Yes.
The thing about coveting is that the Greek word literally means to want more.
Yeah.
So it's basically insatiable.
Yeah.
You never have enough.
Right. And we've all seen folks like that, right?
Probably done it a time or two ourselves.
Or 3 or 4. Or, you know, I really hate to sit back and think about those things because I know it affects my life, and it has affected my life. Especially when I walked away from the Lord for a little time, you know, it affected my life. Anybody else on coveting? Okay, I just think it's something we need to teach our children so that they can deal with these things when they grow. Because your children or grandchildren, as we grandparents find out, and your grandchildren are raised by the influence of the church, they're capable of what? They capable of committing fornication? Yeah. Sometimes we put them in those situations, whether we realize it or not. They're capable of doing anything. I told a When I first moved to Fredericksburg, there were a lot of homeschoolers, and I wasn't really familiar with homeschooling. And I believe in homeschooling, and Janie and I have done it. But I told this homeschooler mother, I said, you know, you really can't trust teenagers. Oh boy, was that a mistake? Well, I can trust my kids, and I can do that. And her kids, a couple of her kids, did some of those very things that she was saying they wouldn't do. What we have to do is wake up and realize, unless we stand by them and teach them and stay with them and help them through these things, they're capable of doing anything we've done. Because sin is prevalent where? Throughout the world. So, brothers and sisters, when you see a preacher fall, do preachers ever fall? Yes. In sexual immorality? Do elders ever fall in sexual immorality? Yeah, Gene say, oh, no, not, but yeah, I've seen that happen. As well as any other. It's because we don't do what? We don't protect ourselves. So my wife knows what I need to protect myself against. And, you know, you need to have a covenant with your what? With your eyes. And you need to be honest and truthful about those things so you can help each other walk through what together? Through life. The problem when something comes into your mind is not when it comes into your mind. The problem is leaving it where? In your mind. So you keep yourself away from sexual immorality. Of course, we know what the effects then would be of adultery or coveting on a marriage. And even coveting materialistic things can ruin a marriage. You know, it can destroy a marriage, so you need to help your children with those things. Anything on this before we move on, and I'll just introduce next week's lesson. Gene?
I was just thinking, the cell phone, you hear more about teenagers sexting, but
Yeah.
it's very easy to text somebody without maybe your spouse knowing, or
Mm-hmm.
your child, you not knowing your child.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally different when you and I were.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why my spouse knows my email address and my text. I mean, she's free to look at my phone anytime she wants to, or the computer. Should she not be free to do that? Well, that's my privacy. Is there anything really private between us? You know? So that's a good thing to bring up. And by the way, there is some terrific research done on the effects of cell phones with your children and stuff. You need to read the research, okay? And we need to really be taking some of this stuff away sometimes because it's not healthy.
But it doesn't apply just to them.
Would you?
But I'm saying you talk
Haven't
to you know, people our age are out there with Match.com.
Yeah, and when I'm sitting down watching a movie at home with my wife, I'm never on my phone. I'm never on my phone. But anyhow, we'll go on something else, okay?
I'm not trying to make
Okay, all right. So, what we're going to discuss next week, what we're going to get into is the wife's role. What you're going to find out is something very, very interesting is the scriptures talk more about the wife's role than it does the husband's role. At first glance. But we're going to learn some things about the husband's role that bears much more responsibility before the throne of God than what the wife's role does. And I'm not saying her role is not important, but we need to understand what God expects in a marriage. And so we're going to take a look at that. And to do that, ladies, and I really hate teaching on this, so I'll depend on you ladies to say quite a bit. We're going to look at Proverbs 31:10 through 31. Now, just to give you a kickoff here, I want you to turn over to Proverbs 18 and verse 22. Proverbs 18:22. See, doing this just right. I love this verse. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. He who finds a wife finds a good thing. That's a pretty impressive statement. That talks about the value of this woman in a fellow's life. It's a good thing to have her there. But also it's a blessing from who? Yeah, It's a blessing from God. Matt?
So a number of the messages we read tonight are written toward that.
Yes.
You know, do you think in all cases that it's safe to interpret it reciprocally?
I think so.
I don't know that there's a reason why you should not, but I didn't know.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up because I never thought about that because I was looking at it reciprocally. You know what I mean? You all heard what Matt said. The passages we read tonight seem to apply only to men when you read them. But no, Exodus 20 says, thou shalt not commit adultery. You know what I mean? So I never thought about that there, but we want to make clear. Can a woman commit adultery? Can a woman commit fornication? Can our children commit fornication? I mean, our children, our teenagers, and sometimes even below that. So thanks for bringing it up, Matt. Did you have anything else you wanted to throw in?
Well, since you
I got 2 minutes.
said that example where there, looking at it again, I never looked at the comparison of the couple that Paul illustrates with about when you pray and fast together for a time, you know, come together again, let you. So he doesn't just say, when you take a break from sex.
That's exactly what he's talking about.
Talking about what he's talking, starting with a couple that's in sync spiritually and communicating with God. Uses them, you know, the ones who would say, oh, well, they're really firing on themselves. They're just married couple. They're sitting around talking about, hey, let's spend 2 or 3 days maybe in prayer and fasting. And they still can be tempted.
And they what?
If they refrain from sex during fasting, or maybe it's a week,
Uh-huh.
that couple still can be tempted.
Yeah, they need to be careful, don't they?
It's a strong spiritual couple.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out.
No, you're right. It's a good thing to throw out.
That is the example.
Yeah. If y'all didn't hear, I'm sure you heard what Matt said, even though I had a hard time on the end of it. What he said was right. I just had a hard time hearing it. I've seen couples do this over and over. I wish we had time to talk about when a guy will come in and say, my wife hasn't done this with me. Am I allowed to say the word have sex with me, okay, in this group? My wife hasn't had sex with me in 6 months. Well, he may be a scoundrel, but is it for either a man or a wife to deny the physical relationship that's in 1 Corinthians 7, would that be a sin, Matt? Yeah, because your body belongs to who? Your wife, and her body belongs to Matt. So thanks for bringing that up, and thanks for getting us through the class, and we can start next week on number 4. Anything to close out with? Gene, would you close us out in prayer, please?
Lord, we just thank you for this opportunity to come together and study the word about Lord, I pray that we do follow what you've told us, that we are not immoral, that we respect and of our spouses, those that are married, those that are not, that impure. Lord, we just ask that you continue to watch over those that were mentioned earlier that are struggling with illnesses, and be with them and be